Recently, the U.S. Air Force released a retirement plan for fiscal year 2026, in preparation for the October 2026 reduction of 340 active aircraft. The most notable of this list is the 162 A-10 Thunderbolt IIs that make up nearly half of the program. In fact, they are the last A-10s in the USAF's active fleet. After nearly 50 years of service, this classic attack aircraft, which was once so famous and loved by countless military fans, may finally have to say goodbye to the blue sky. But what is more outrageous is that the military bacteria and the access to related news actually saw some foreign media claim that the United States should sell these retired A-10 to Taiwan. For this view, military bacteria really feel speechless. This is to come to the PLA's fighters, warships and air defense forces, CENTED. As a special ground attack aircraft born in the 1970s, the A-10, was the US military had high hopes, was regarded as the core weapon against the Soviet Union's armored clusters. The A-10 attack aircraft low-cost, sturdy and reliable, simple and practical. Under the guidance of such tactical thinking, the US Air Force soon installed more than 700 A-10 attack aircraft. However, in later service and actual combat, the US military quickly realized that the A-10 was not as good as they had originally thought. In fact, the A-10 was not initially designed to target Soviet armored forces, but rather was developed as a long-endurance patrol attack aircraft, combining experience with anti-guerrilla warfare in the jungles of Vietnam, where it was only required to counter anti-aircraft fire from light weapons such as anti-aircraft guns. Thus in the beginning, most of the A-10 conceptual designs were propeller airplanes. However, in the course of continuous improvement, the development objectives of the A-10 were drastically changed, and it was required to have the ability to combat Soviet tanks covered by anti-aircraft fire, which was obviously far beyond the objectives of the A-10 concept. In the early 1970s, the U.S. Army began development of the Go-8 Avenger cannon, which it decided to mount on the still under development A-X in order to give the attack aircraft the ability to destroy tanks at a very low cost. According to the U.S. Army's vision, the new attack aircraft could destroy Soviet tanks using $12 shells instead of $10,000 missiles, which became the signature weapon of the A-10. In 1977, the U.S. Army used 13 M47 Patton tanks as targets to test the anti-tank capability of the A-10's gun. In 9 attacks, the A-10 shells hit only 98 rounds, of which 3 tanks cannot move. 2 tanks damaged the main gun, but none of the tanks were destroyed. Keep in mind that at this point the M47 was already an extremely outdated and old tank, and would have only been less effective if it had been replaced with the up-and-coming Soviet T-72S and T-80S. And in the attack, the Soviet tanks will not be stupid to stop on the ground as a target. A-10 want to use machine guns to block tanks, almost a pipe dream. Of course, military bacteria do not deny that the A-10 has a very strong anti-tank capability, but this ability is equipped with its GM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missiles to give. Both F-5 and F-16 fighters are capable of carrying this powerful anti-tank weapon. In other words, the A-10 has never been an irreplaceable aircraft. In addition to its offensive capabilities, the A-10's proud survivability has actually been widely questioned. Conventional wisdom has it that the A-10 is highly resistant to strikes and has a titanium, armored bathtub that maximizes the pilot's survivability. During the Gulf War, there were a large number of cases in which A-10 attack aircraft returned safely after being hit, which seemed to prove the solidity and reliability of the A-10. In reality, however, this view is completely wrong. Throughout Operation Desert Storm, A-10 attack aircraft flew 8,640 sorties, while F-16s flew 11,689 sorties. During the operation, 6 A-10s were shot down and 12 wounded by Iraq, while only 3 F-16s were shot down and 4 wounded. In other words, for every 1,440 sorties flown, 1 A-10 was shot down, while it took 3,899 sorties for 1 F-16 to be shot down. The risk of an A-10 being shot down was 2.7 times greater than that of an F-16, and the probability of being wounded was 5 times greater than that of an F-16. It is true that the ruggedized A-10 strike aircraft survives far better than the vulnerable F-16 after being hit by enemy fire, but the hidden message behind this is that the A-10 is also far more likely to be hit than the F-16. In fact, during the Gulf War, the U.S. military soon ordered the A-10 to stop using it against Iraq's elite Republican Guard because of its high loss rate, and instead used the F-16s, and the A-10s were only tasked with simple airstrike missions against second- and third-rate Iraqi units. And in the later NATO airstrikes against the FRI, the use of the A-10 was greatly restricted. In other words, even the Iraqi and Fry forces of the last century were able to pose a great threat to the outdated aircraft like the A-10. In fact, it's not the first time that the USAF has wanted to get rid of these hot A-10s. As early as the end of the Cold War, the US military had the idea of completely eliminating this backward aircraft, but with the outbreak of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the low-cost A-10 has instead had a very good performance in counter-guerrilla operations, greatly delaying the progress of this program. Moreover, if the A-10 is completely retired, the US Air Force will lose all of its dedicated ground attack fighters, so the US Army and Congress have strongly urged the Air Force to retain the A-10 or to develop a new type of dedicated ground attack aircraft to maintain a fleet dedicated to ground attack, rather than using a multi-purpose fighter to conduct ground attack missions. In today's perspective, this view is simply foolish, and the reality is that it is. Because the A-10 is so old, anyone with a modicum of military savvy can see that it is simply not capable of handling the threats of modern warfare. In recent years, there has been much less resistance from the US Congress to phasing out the A-10. In 2023, Congress approved the retirement of a batch of 21 A-10s from the US Air Force, and in 2024, it approved the retirement of another 42, leaving 162 A-10s scheduled to be phased out over a 10-year period. But now, with the Trump administration in office, the US military's defense budget has seen drastic changes, and the retirement plan for these A-10s has been moved up significantly. However, this plan is still only a program, and has not been approved by Congress. The military armed forces estimate that the destination of these A-10s may be drawn out for a while yet. What is more outrageous is that after announcing the decommissioning plan, some foreign media actually claimed that the United States and the United Kingdom had given this batch of A-10 attack aircraft to Ukraine and Taiwan. In fact, before that, the Ukrainian defense minister approached the United States to provide 100 A-10 attack planes to counter the Russian offensive, but the US military rejected the request. At the time, US Secretary of Defense Austin made it clear that these old and slow planes would be a target for Russian air defense systems. In fact, in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the US military has lost many of its more powerful F-16s, and that's if they are used carefully. If the US military had actually provided the A-10, I'm afraid this classic aircraft would have been disgraced by now. As for handing over the A-10 to Taiwan, the military mushroom can only say that this program is simply stupid. It is important to realize that, as a low-cost, dedicated ground attack aircraft, the A-10 was designed to be used as an expendable item in a large-scale duel between the United States and the Soviet Union. Even the Iraqi army was able to wound or destroy this radarless, slow-flying, outdated weapon in combat. Even the most outdated J-7 fighters in the PLA's equipment lineup can easily destroy the A-10. According to the US Army's vision, the A-10 attack aircraft is a weapon that requires at least partial air control and effectively suppresses enemy air defense fire before it can be put into actual combat. With today's Taiwanese Air Force strength, not to mention suppressing the PLA's anti-aircraft firepower, a few F-16s can survive the first day of the war. I'm afraid it's a problem. If you get a few more A-10s, at most they will only have the ability to consume a few more PLA missiles. There are also some media outlets that argue that the A-10 is suitable for using machine guns to target and destroy drones and roving missiles, rather than for ground attacks. Obviously, these media outlets seriously lack the most basic military common sense. As an old aircraft with no radar, old and outdated avionics, and neither air-to-air detection nor radar locking capability, how is the A-10 going to find drones and then target them? In fact, if the US really provide the A-10 to the Taiwan army, the PLA is afraid that even too late to be happy, this kind of not only no threat to their own, but also knockdown can be counted on the war record of the aircraft. It is not to send to the door of the war results of the big gift package.